Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soccer Queens podcast. Today, I have a very special guest. He is, first and foremost, a dad, a soccer fanatic, and a UEFA B license holder. He has a wealth of knowledge and he's kind of a big deal. He doesn't really talk about his coaching experience as much, but he's always tweeting so much knowledge. And I really wanted to have Steve Rollins on the show to go into the current state of the youth soccer system, what player development means, some tips on college recruiting, and how to get seen. So, Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
I'm excited to have you, and I know you're quiet with what you do as far as your training in New Jersey, and I've heard great things about it. So, what are you up to right now, and also what's your coaching background?
So my coaching background is I was fortunate enough as a youngster to play in Amsterdam and stuff. And so when I became an adult, I reached out to the club, and fortunately for me, a lot of the guys that I knew as a child were still there, and so that gave me the opportunity to work with them on as assistant coaches there, and work through my licenses and get up to a UEFA B. Um, Coaching at the time was not my primary vocation, right? I had another job, so it was very nice of them to give me the opportunity to work with the teams during the week and stuff, being that I wasn't one of their full-time staff. So that was nice. And I did that for a couple of years, um, close to, 4 or 5 years. And then I went and I did something similar for a club in Spain, just north of Barcelona, where I worked with their youth 16s. And again, I did it as, an assistant coach to the head coach, and hopefully I brought something a little different than they were getting from their coaches, because I had, the experience out in Amsterdam. And then I also got certified to work under some of the badges of some of the big clubs at a lot of their English speaking camps, whether that was back in the Netherlands or here in the US. So that was a great learning experience too, because you got to work with a lot of the coaches from those academies. And, as much as the kids are learning, I was learning as well. And then, when I got to the US, I started with a bunch of youth teams for a while, mostly, around my kids and stuff. And I gave that up when my kids started playing more competitive. And so that was about 7, 8 years ago. And since then, I've been, training independently. I do supplemental training. I don't have teams. And I train pretty much right around 50-ish or so kids are in our group at a time. And most of the kids are GA, ECNL, MLS next level, a couple of town kids thrown in there. We never turn a kid away because they're not as good or anything. It's just the kids that tend to seek out supplemental training tend to be the better players. So we do that, and I've done that for a lot of times. And when I was working in Europe, we had lots of kids who ended up going professional. A lot of them are still playing in the Power 5 leagues. In the US, I haven't had any professionals go through my program, but a ton of college players, from D3 to SEC Power 5 schools. So that's what I've been doing.
Awesome. I love it. And I was drawn to bring you on the podcast because of the training you're doing and also what you're tweeting about in terms of player development, and not just leaning one way, just the physical side or the technical side, but you're working on all of it. Especially your tactical training. I'm a huge fan of. So let's just start broad. Everyone talks about this phrase player development. It's thrown around everywhere, every club, and I'm just curious how you define it.
So for me, player development is less about the club or the coach and more about the individual player, right? So every individual player comes to me and they have a baseline, right, where they are in their journey. and where they want their journey to end up. And so player development is taking them from that beginning point to where they want to go. And so it's different, right? When I was in Europe, everybody wanted to become professionals, right? So we had to take them from their baseline to the professional level. Here in the US, I have kids who want to top out at high school varsity. Great, no problem. We're going to get you from where you are so you can become a good high school varsity player. Some kids want to play in college. Some kids want to go professional. So player development for me is about the assistance in the journey of the individual. And because those journeys are specific to the individual, it takes on different flavors. So it's not, I'm a player development coach. Well, yeah, we all are. We all want to make people better. But when you really get down to the nitty gritty, it's the player's development, not the coach teaching player development.
What would you say the main differences are between soccer in Europe and in the US in the youth space?
So in Europe, and it has to do with the revenue flows, very few coaches, especially in the U16s and under, care about the weekend, right? We could win, we can lose, that's fine. But my job generally isn't based upon whether we win or lose over the weekend. When I coached in Amsterdam, we had the U12s, and our job was based in how we got graded is how many of our U12s skipped U14 and went straight to U16. That was it. I was there for years. Never once was I asked, "Did you win Saturday?" Here in the U.S., it's all about how many kids can I get into my program, and then can I market short-term success to accomplish that. So I had 8, 9, 10-year-olds when I first started in the States. And I would tell them, I don't care if you're good at 8, 9, or 10. I want you to be good at 16. So we're not going to work on things that are only effective at 10, 11, 12. Right? I want you to learn the skills that are effective at 16, 17, 18. Because that's, when you want to impact your journey. Nobody came in and said, oh, what's your journey for a 10-year-old? And says, well, I want to win the Summer Select tournament in New Jersey, right? That's they never say that, but we coach that way, right? So that's, I think, is the biggest difference. And when you change the mindset from short-term returns to long-term returns, how you coach changes.
I'm still trying to figure out why we are set up this way in the US and why we're so focused on winning and that short-term success. And is there a way to crawl out of this? Do you think there's any hope for us to become like Europe for our kids?
So I think there are a lot of, let me phrase it, I think there are some organizations that are doing a great job. And I think the trend is to push more towards the long term. But I think the current gatekeepers pretty much need to die out. They control what most parents will see as success for their children. And until that mindset changes, I mean, you can fight it as much as you want. Like we all talk about, the alphabet leagues and everything, but let's call it what it is. I mean, that's the landscape today. And if you don't want to play in that landscape, you can make it, but man, it's a rough road to hoe.
What about the pay to play model? So is that a thing in Europe, or how does that work? Because here I'm looking at the club dues every year and I'm just like, man, this is getting out of hand. Like I think some parents are being charged like close to 8K a year for some clubs. It's crazy that on top of that you have all the travel and the hotels and the showcases. So is it like that in Europe?
So every place that I've been, so I can't speak to every nook and cranny of the continent. Um, the yearly fees are roughly what we pay for uniforms. So it's $200, $400 or so, and that's at the top training in countries. They get their revenue from selling their product, which is a good soccer player. We get our revenue from enlisting product, regardless of how good they are. And so it's just a reaction to the revenue stream.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, as far as like girls ECNL, as far as the club dues, yes, they're expensive, but some of the coaching is really great, and some teams do a really great job, and the investment can be worth it. So, what are your thoughts on like ECNL and GA and the development there?
So so I don't really look at it as ECNL or GA. I kind of look at it as more club specific. There are ECNL clubs that are doing a phenomenal, great job for the kids in their charge, and there are ECNL clubs that should be put out to pasture. I mean, they're just awful. And there's clubs anywhere in between those two extremes. Um, the problem with ECNL and GA, or the problem that it creates for the landscape, is that they really hold the key, especially on the girls' side, to college exposure. Right? That's where you're going to get the most exposure just for joining the league. Now, are there other ways to do it? Yes, but you have to understand the landscape. You have to know what those other avenues are, and you have to be able to afford it. So, it's kind of like in America, we want everything fast and easy, and those two organizations are the fast and easy way to get in front of college coaches, and that's what they sell more than development, right? They sell the exposure.
Right. And I've had this conversation with Don Williams, and you might disagree with him on this, but if a player wants to go to a Division 1 program, a well-known one, do they have to be on an ECNL team?
So you're talking absolutes. So the answer to the absolute is no. Right? There are players every year that go to very good D1 programs who did not play at one of the higher, alphabet leagues, ECNL, GA, MLS Next. Happens every year. Lots of players. Is it the easier path? Is it the one that most parents are going to be able to navigate? Yes. So, are there other ways? Absolutely. But this is the one where the skids are already greased.
So let's talk about the work you do for Sport Recruit USA,
Yeah.
and what you're looking for when you go out to evaluate players, and where you're suggesting them to look for schools. So let's just dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. So I do scouting for SRUSA. I go out there and I look to help kids in their journey. I mean, that's really my focus. So I live in the Northeast. I know the Northeast schools well. So my specialty area are your higher academic institutions in the Northeast, and then a few of those scattered out there. I really that's like my focus. I talk to other colleagues and stuff who talk about D2 schools in the Midwest. I don't have a clue. I couldn't even name them. But in the high academic schools in the Northeast, I tend to know those fairly well. I know who the coaches are. I know what their playing style is. I know what they recruit. I know what they look for, and so I can help guide kids in that path. And for me, I do it gratis. I just if you sign up and you get Don to send me to one of your games, like for you to talk to me or for me to help you, it doesn't cost you a thing. when I'm there and I'm looking at kids, so the first thing that I look for is a sense of athleticism. And I know that's going to sound strange coming from me, but by athleticism, I don't look for the biggest, strongest, fastest kid on the field. I look to say, do you have enough athleticism to compete, and at what level? Because you can be really, really technical and still be a cone defensively on the field, right? If you just can't move, right? So I look, did you achieve this bar rather than who's the best athlete on the field? It's slightly different than others, but that's how I look at it. And now I say, okay, if your athleticism is good enough to play at that level, where is your decision making? The reason I go to decision making before that, because in decision making, what I want to see is, are you aware of your surroundings, right? Are you scanning? If you're aware of your surroundings, are you preparing to take advantage of what you see? I care less about whether that decision is right or wrong, but more that you're going through the process. Because at the college level, coaches will have an easier time telling you the cues they want you, what they want you to do based upon what cues. That's fairly easy for a college coach to pass on to their team. What's difficult is to get you to see them to begin with. Right? So that's the baseline I'm looking for. Are you scanning, and are you making a decision, regardless of whether it's good? And then I'll look at your execution of that decision, right? Are you able to execute the simplest of decisions? Can you make a 10, 15, 20-yard pass with both feet, with proper weight, to the correct foot of your teammate? I am not a huge fan of the player who gets the ball, puts their head down, and tries to out-dribble the team. I think that is very self-limiting, and it's just not how I envision your top end player. And there are lots of people who disagree there, right? They want, hey, I'm the fast girl or guy on the team, and look, I can do all these fancy moves. But to me, the better players at the college level make the players around them better. Right? It's not just about what you do on the field. It's what you enable the other 10 players on your team to be able to do on the field. And I really think that the college game, and the professional game is already there, but the college game is moving more towards that. There are very few players who are so good dribbling the ball that they can make a difference on a field without involving the other 10 teammates. So making everybody else around you better is huge.
I love that. And that's why I love what you talk about, and the work that you're doing is that decision-making side. And I think oftentimes coaches and even performance coaches are like, no, we need to lean more on the physical. And it's like, no, we can work on it all. We can do it all, because it's just so competitive now, and you need to stand out. And that's where the game's headed. And that's probably one of the reasons why the US women's team is starting to fall behind some of these other international teams. So it's the whole game is changing. And as far as like training to be a better decision maker, so I see a lot of technical trainings on Instagram, just unopposed, and just tons of flashy moves and dribbling through cones. Like even like 16-year-olds, I'm seeing this. What do you think of that? And how can players better train their technical ability to incorporate the quick decision making to prepare for college?
So for me, if you're an individual that wants to play for college, you're doing more than your 3 times a week, 2 times a week, 4 times, whatever your team is practicing. So when you're looking at unopposed stuff, and where I disagree with that is, if you're practicing 4.5 hours a week, which is your average, higher end youth team, right? 3 times an hour and a half a week is pretty much the average. That's not a lot of time. It really isn't. So the more time you take away from that in training looking, making decisions, and preparing before all that stuff that you do when you don't have the ball, the less proficient a player will be when they have the ball. My opinion, others will disagree. When you're talking about what somebody wants to do outside of the team, hey, that stuff is great. You want to work with somebody and work on cutting with the outside of the foot so they can show you the technique. That's great. Go there, have yourself a blast. I think most of it could be done by pulling up a YouTube video and just doing it 1,000 times. You get a ball on a wall, and that's the greatest teacher you can ever have. And I think it was Dennis Bergkamp in his book, when he talked about he used to play against this brick wall. And what was great about the brick wall is the bricks were uneven. So when the ball hit the wall, it never came back clean. And he said he was able to develop his touch because he always had to react to how differently the ball would come off this wall. And I still say it's the simplest things out there that will give you the most benefit. But as a soccer coach, you can't, who's going to sell to a kid? Yeah, go to a racquetball court and spend an hour just hitting the ball off the wall, receiving, going the other way. You can't sell it. And if you can't sell it, they don't promote it.
Such a great answer. And I'm having flashbacks to when I played club in high school, and my coach was Laurie Choi. She had played at UNC and in the women's professional league for a while, but I had asked her to do one-on-one training, and she goes, "Erica, I can do that for you, but you're better off just going against a wall or going on a tennis court where the ball's moving quick and you have to control it." And that was the best advice I was ever given. And nowadays I just see this surge of skills trainers, and all the drills are unopposed, and they're super predictable and rehearsed. And that's my biggest concern, because with what you said about decision making, it's like that's not being taught in these drills.
No, and the problem to me, and with unopposed passing in a team setting, is if a coach wanted to do an unopposed drill because they really wanted to hone in on a specific technique and really hone in on details, then on an off time here and there, in my opinion, fine. It's not a hard, especially for beginner coaches, right? Because it's very, very difficult in a 4v4+3 game to be able to pick out poor technique. Like, I know coaches who've been doing this 10, 20, 30 years, they could do it at the drop of a hat, no problem. But if you're a beginner coach with 1 or 2, 3 years experience, and you got U17 boys who are pinging that ball around, I would say you're an incredible coach if you can tell if the toe's too close to the ground, right? If it's got to be up a little bit, because it moves so fast. And if you're able to get that skill as a coach in your first 3 years, you're better than me. I should tip my hat to you. So if you are that beginner coach and stuff, and you can't do it in context, I can understand why you may want to take a half an hour once a month and work on something very detailed and very specific from a technical standpoint. But that's not what I see, right? When you watch these do it, the coaches don't say a word. So is it a good pass? Who knows? Was the receipt good? Who knows? Did they prepare their body before they, so they're facing where they want to go so they can attack that space on the first touch? Generally not. Why? There's no consequence. So context gives consequence, and it's the consequence that teaches.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of people say, well, you need to work on speed, but if they don't position their body, then even if they're fast, they might still be a step behind if their body's facing a certain way or they're not directing their touch, and then it just goes out the window. So for people who want to improve this side of the game, their decision making, their body language when receiving the ball, their scanning, so they should not hire a skills coach who does just this rehearse stuff. They should seek someone out who incorporates these things. I know you do that. It's hard to find. You're in New Jersey, but it's tough. It's tough to find.
Well, I don't know if it's that tough to find. I know plenty of coaches who are, much better than me at it that the kids can go to. And I'm not saying don't go to a skills coach, but understand that what a skills coach is going to give you is not the entire picture, right? It's a piece of the puzzle. And I've taken my kids to skills coaches because they needed to work on a specific technique. There's nothing wrong with that. Where I start having issue with it is when skills coaching is your team coaching. Right? So skills coaching is an individual activity. Team coaching is a collective activity, and they should be treated differently.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents will hire a skills trainer and they don't really have the end goal in mind. They're just like, oh, they just need better ball control or just more confidence, but they don't say, oh, well, they need help with striking the ball with their laces. That's a very specific end goal. So yeah, I really like that. Now, as far as the physical side of the game, so I'm a huge fan of conditioning and practice and small sided games. What should that look like, and is that something you're incorporating in your trainings?
Yeah. So my training is because I'm supplemental, and um, I don't have to worry about other teams coming onto my fields and stuff. So I do 2-hour blocks. So in my 2-hour block, what I try to do is to make sure that you are on cognitively for 30-minute blocks. So when they talk about, fitness training, kids give up in their mind long before they're physically unable to do something. So the trainings that I do are all really based around the player being on cognitively for 30 minutes straight. Now, I'm working now with, 13 to 17-year-olds mostly. I wouldn't expect a 7-year-old to do it. If it was 7-year-olds, I might do 15-minute blocks, right? But you really need to get away from standing in lines. The other thing is, now that you have their brain on, you have to understand that in positional play, right, there's 5 components of it. Timing, lines, distance, situation, and angles, right? So every time one of those changes, you need to move, regardless whether you have the ball or not. Now, that move could be dropping a back foot 1 meter so you can open up to see an opponent, or that could be a 40-yard sprint, right? But in every exercise that I do, every time one of those things changes, which is pretty much every time the ball or an individual moves, because the space doesn't move, right? The field stays the same. You need to adjust. So you are constantly moving and constantly thinking for every exercise, right? And I do 3 35-minute exercises for a session. And if you're doing that and you're giving your best effort every time you move, then inside the team practice, that's your conditioning. Now, there is a place for the weight room, and there's a place for, speed training and stuff outside. But I kind of look at those the the same way I look at specific skill trainings, right? That's how you make the individual better, and that's on the individual, right? To take 30 minutes of an hour and a half practice to work on physical fitness, to me, just lowers the standard for everybody on the field. They're not going to play the game as well as a collective if you're losing an hour and a half a week because you're running without a ball.
Yeah, I totally agree there. And as far as the conditioning within the small sided games and practice, it's so important because of that cognitive component and just getting a higher stimulus than match day. And unfortunately, I see so much standing around at practices. And then it's like, okay, now we got to do extra stuff outside of practice because they're not getting enough. And we're just super inefficient with time. So that's important for coaches to keep in mind, but also players just taking the responsibility of doing the extra work when needed. And coaches can't do it all. Maybe they can do some on field strength, but it really does take away time if we're going longer than 10 minutes even. You can incorporate in the warm up a little bit, but you can't do it all. It really comes down to that individual responsibility. When you get to college and professional, sure, you'll have more time, you'll have your own performance coach, but in high school, that's a self program. You have to do that on your own.
And that's why, to me, the most important part of a player is the character.
Yeah.
Right? If you're the entitled player who's like, well, if my coach isn't going to do it for me in the hour and a half I'm with him or her, then I'm not going to do it. Well, you're self-limiting. And there's nothing that coach is going to do to help you reach the pinnacle of success in the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when I was picking players, character was always number one. And then cognition, right? Are you able to process information well? Do you take instruction well? Do you see things? Are you able to pick up cues? Was number two. And then the competence, which is generally taught by repetition, was always the third. Right now, competence may become more and more important the older you get. But when you're talking about kids who have 5, 6, 7, 8 years left on their journey, competence is generally repetition. Right? So if you have a 11, 12, 13-year-old who has trouble receiving the ball in the air, well, go get a wall somewhere and do 1,000 balls in the air a day, and in 2 months you will be competent at that skill. So, it's technique is generally around repetition.
Yeah, you can't be entitled anymore. You have to put in the reps on your own, and a lot of girls still have that, and I'd say boys players as well. But just know that there's thousands of other players out there who will do it better than you, and they're not entitled. If that's motivation, hopefully you get after it, but you can't have this mindset of, well, my coach will take care of it. No, there's other parts of your game and skills you have to improve on your own. So what players who want to play at a high level in college, what would you say are 3 things they should really focus on as we wrap up here?
So I'd say number one, what do you do when you don't have the ball? And understand, when you get to the point where college coaches are watching you play, they don't watch the ball. If you talk to a college coach on the sideline when they're watching a kid and a goal scored and they were watching a center back, most of them couldn't tell you how that happened. They're not watching the game. They're watching what you're doing. So what you do off the ball is probably the number one thing that youth players don't pay attention to. And they just, when a college coach watches film right? And I'm looking to take advantage of a certain center back, right? I'm really not worried about what's going on with the ball. I'm looking at the movement of that center back or right back or left back or whoever I'm looking to take advantage of. When I scout, it's the same way, right? I want to see, hey, did that space open up in front of you when the ball's all the way in the other corner? And did you see it and take advantage of it? Right? If I'm watching the ball who, is being dribbled by a player I'm not interested in for whatever reason, right? They don't want to go to my school. I miss what you're doing. And so that's probably the number one thing that I would tell kids is you're really missing how much off the ball means in your recruiting process.
So that's number one. Then number two.
Number two, work rate. Right? I want to see you work hard the entire game. I don't want to see you turn off. And work hard doesn't mean run around like a chicken with your head cut off. Right? Working hard means being on at all times. Right? Do I see you start looking around and drifting? Right? Do you lose focus? So work rate is not constantly running. Work rate is being on while you're on the field, right? If you're on the field for 25, 30, 40 minutes, 45, whatever it is, are you on and are you constantly trying to better your position while you're on the field? So number one, was what are you doing off the ball? Number two is your work rate. Are you physically trying to do things? And probably number three would be decisions. Are you making good decisions? I would say 90% of every ball kicked by an ECNL player is kicked back into traffic. It's a, generally speaking, it's a bad decision, right? ECNL is huge about really aggressive, very physically fit individuals who just make bad decisions. And so what those decisions are, really, really important, because it's easier for me to work on your technique, repetition, or your fitness level, let's get you strength and conditioning work, than it is for me to teach you to make the right decisions, which is a process that takes years.
I love those three. And I think that's going to be super helpful for my audience. So Steve, thank you for all of your advice and this amazing discussion. I know you're tweeting a lot and I want my audience to follow you. So what is your Twitter?
I think it's Soft Top 67.
I believe that's it. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
put it in the caption, everyone. So make sure you check that out below. Is that the main place everyone can find you?
Yeah, and like if you find me there, that's fine. Like I always keep my DMs open, so if somebody ever wanted a phone call or some other medium, just if you just contact me there first, I'm not opposed to leaving the Twitter sphere.
Great. And as far as the evaluation for the college recruiting, you said that you would go out and watch a player for free and evaluate them. Is that how that works?
That's exactly how it works. If you sign up with SRUSA, and I think they also have a phone number where you can sign up, and we're at it's not just me, but we go to pretty much most of the major tournaments around both male and female. We'll come over and we'll watch you and give you an evaluation and tell you where we think you sit. Generally, it's not what somebody wants to hear, but we give you our opinion, and we're not always right, but we will give you an honest assessment.
So guys, also check out SRUSA in the caption below. And yeah, it's not always what you want to hear, but they do amazing work, and they really fit soccer players with the right colleges the majority of the time, and they just have great testimonials from their clients. So Steve, thank you. Everyone will follow up with you, and truly appreciated this discussion.
Great. Thank you. Good seeing you again.